Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for standing by and welcome to today's session in the ReadyTalk webinar series. Today's seminar is entitled Planning for 2013, How to Best Utilize Top Lead Gen Tactics for the New Year. Today we are joined by a couple of experts on the subject from MarketingSherpa and Mech Labs. We've got Daniel Burstein, Director of Editorial Content for Mech Labs, and we also have David Kirkpatrick, who's a Senior Reporter at Mech Labs as well. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we do get started today. During the presentation, all participants are going to be in a listen-only mode. However, if you guys do have any questions throughout the presentation at all, please feel free to chat those into the chat feature that's located at the lower left-hand portion of your screen. And we'll be sure to queue those up for these guys at the end. Also, as we had mentioned before, feel free to join the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag #SherpaWebinar. You can also see the guys' Twitter handles and the hashtag there at the bottom of your screen. As a reminder, this webinar today is being recorded Monday, November 5th. And you guys are all going to receive a link to the recording later on today in the post-event email along with a PDF of the slide deck. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Daniel to kick off today's presentation and share just a little bit more about themselves. So go ahead, Daniel.
Great. Thanks a lot, Simone, and thanks for letting us speak on this ReadyTalk webinar. Like Simone said, what we're going to talk about is some lead generation tactics and tips that you can use going into 2013. And lead generation is a big topic, so we're going to try to look at it from end to end. When we put this webinar together, there's so much that David and I work on across marketing and with B2B marketing and digital marketing, and it just becomes what can we best give you in the next hour to help you. And so I'm going to throw that challenge a bit to you. So we've put together what we think is going to be helpful, but this is the great thing about a platform like ReadyTalk. This is the great thing about webinars and Twitter. We can be interactive here. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments. We want to hear what tactics are working for you for lead generation. We want to hear what you're planning for 2013. We want you to speak to each other. Some ways you can do that. You can use that hashtag #SherpaWebinar. You can talk to each other. You can talk to us. You can ask your questions. You can share your tips. You can also use the ReadyTalk platform. That's the chat function right there on your left. Ask us questions about lead generation. Ask us what your most pressing challenges are. Ask about how to use this ReadyTalk platform better. We'll put Simone on the line too and get some answers there. But let me first tell you a little bit about what we do. I'm Daniel Burstein, the Director of Editorial Content for Mech Labs. Mech Labs is the parent company of MarketingSherpa, also Marketing Experiment. And basically, me and my team are out there every day talking to marketers like you and trying to figure out what really works in digital marketing. We also here in Marketing Experiments are doing our own testing and experimentation with Fortune 500 companies, with startups to find out what really works. And then we report on that through newsletters that are free through our websites, MarketingSherpa.com and MarketingExperiments.com, through blogs, through benchmark reports, through many different ways. And David Kirkpatrick, our Senior Reporter, David specifically reports on the B2B marketing beat. That means he's on the phone probably almost every day, making about 100, 200 calls a year to talk to B2B marketers, to get their case studies, to write it up, to figure out what works, to talk to vendors, and to really have his finger on the pulse of the B2B marketing industry. So I'm here in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. David's joining us in Dallas. How's everything in Dallas today, Denver?
It's doing great. It's about low 70s, sunny, and a very nice day.
Great. So, and as I said, Simone's out there in Denver, and she's here to answer your questions about ReadyTalk as well. Hashtag #SherpaWebinar. Like I said, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what's working. We want to hear what's not, and we want your questions. You can help shape what content we have in this webinar as we deliver this webinar. And a little bit, this is about that cycle I was telling you about of our research. It starts out with benchmark reports and books and surveys and finding out what really works from you, and then writing up case studies, doing interviews, turning that into proven tactics through our training. We have on-demand training. We also have in-person training, such as our email summit, which is coming up in February in Las Vegas. A lot of the research we're talking about today comes from the B2B Marketing Benchmark Report. You can see 1,745 organizations participated. We've got lots of different charts, lots of different success stories. We're going to share a little bit of that data with you today. David, why don't you give us an overview of what we'll be talking about?
Okay. Like you mentioned, I talk to marketers all the time. It's one of the best parts of the job, and lead generation is extremely important to B2B marketers, so we definitely want to talk about that. And also, like Daniel told you, we're going to go all the way through the pipeline. We're going to talk about the capture, the actual lead gen, and then how to take that lead all the way through, nurture them, and then finally make that final conversion to a sale, hopefully. And in doing that, we're going to present quite a bit of MarketingSherpa research, like you talked about from our benchmark reports. And from there, we're going to have 2 case studies in 2 different places. And the first one's going to be probably of great interest because it's going to cover how to handle budgets. That's another issue right now with budgets may be cut, maybe not cut, but maybe not increasing. So we're going to talk about how one marketer dealt with an actual budget cut, pretty substantial. And the final thing is we're going to give you 4 steps on improving your marketing activities. And going into this, the 4 steps are going to really cover this, and something to keep in mind through this whole webinar. Everything is going to be very data-driven, very analysis, and so you want to think about your marketing automation solutions, collecting data, and how you're actually handling that. With lead generation, you got the lead, and then you have to score them somehow. So that's all the tracking, all the data. So Daniel, kind of, what do you think about that on data?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely data is so important to marketers these days. I mean, we hear about big data all the time, and there just gets to be so many numbers that you have to deal with. And how do you really find meaning from that? And that's actually something that we're looking at right now. So what you're seeing is the B2B Marketing Benchmark Report, but actually today we launched the MarketingSherpa Marketing Analytics Survey for that benchmark report because we want to learn more about how marketers are using data across 7 different types of marketing, including PPC marketing, email marketing. And so for the next 2 weeks, you can take that survey. I'm going to tweet the survey link through #SherpaWebinar if you're interested. If you take that survey, you will get a free copy of a $97 MarketingSherpa special report on website optimization. And then, stay tuned, and in the next few weeks and months, we're going to look through that survey data and turn it into a benchmark report that we hope will be able to help you out. So let's take a look at what we're going to talk today. Like David said, capture, nurture, convert. Those are really the 3 elements to lead generation, to dealing with leads. Before we jump in, though, I see we got our first question here from Meg, and Meg is going to put us on the spot. She said, what happened to Dr. Flint's book? So Meg, you must be a fan of MECLabs. Thank you for tuning in before. To fill everyone in very briefly, Flint McLaughlin is our CEO and Managing Director of MECLabs, and he's a phenomenal speaker if you've never heard him speak before, and he's also quite a philosopher. And what he's told me in the past, he handed me this Peter Drucker book once, and he said, I don't trust a book until it's been proven for 50 years, and Peter Drucker's a great book. So like everything we do here, we don't really publish anything until it's pretty well thought out, and so I assure you Flint is working on that book right now with his team, talking to publishers, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty interesting book. So Meg, stay tuned. That book will be out, and hopefully that will help you in your job. So as we get into capture, the first thing we want to do, Simone, if you could help launch this poll right here, we want to ask you about what following challenges are most pertinent to your organization. So Simone, if you could open that poll up for us. What we're looking at, we're asking you what challenges are you facing right now? Is it generating high-quality leads? Is it the volume of leads? Maybe not the quality is not important, but you need that volumes. You're on the hook with sales to get a really high number. Is it trying to generate perceived value for your products? Competing in lead generation, generating public relations buzz. That's always a challenge, trying to get PR out there and trying to get some earned media. Is it marketing to a lengthening sales cycle? Perhaps marketers are more challenged with their budgets, can't sell as quickly as you had to in the past, or marketing to more buyer roles. Are more people involved in the buying decision now? Is that your challenge? Before, were you able to sell lower in an organization, but now you have to go higher and higher to get that approval, someplace you didn't have to go before. So, okay, Simone, if you could close that poll out for us, let's see what marketers are telling us. Wow, David, that is a blowout. That is a Texas-sized blowout for generating high-quality leads. Marketers are telling us that is by far their biggest challenge, which is nice to see in a way that marketers aren't so focused on just the volume of leads, just the number, right? Because just throwing a bunch of, let's say email addresses, if you consider that a lead to sales, is not really going to end up in a success. But they're looking for high-quality leads. And that's not so surprising looking at some of our MarketingSherpa data. Year over year, we found that challenges are continuing to rise, are continuing to grow. B2B marketers are feeling more challenged. But the biggest challenge right there on the very top, you can see whether it's a large company, whether it's a medium-sized company, whether it's a small company, is generating high-quality leads. And that's essentially going to be the big focus of what we're talking about today. So we talked about this webinar on lead generation. We figured, well, we can just talk about how to get a bunch of people into your funnel, right? We could talk about how to capture those email addresses, how to get those phone numbers. But really, that's not what lead generation is if you're going to generate high-quality leads. It's going through all these 3 steps of the funnel. Capturing, yes, but then nurturing and converting, that's how you get a high-quality lead. But of course, the biggest challenge, the background that we're all facing when we have to get higher quality leads is that you don't always have all the resources that you feel like you need or that you just want. So here's a quote from the 2012 B2B Marketing Benchmark Report. In just a moment, I'm going to tweet a free excerpt link to through the hashtag Sherpa webinar, so you can get an excerpt with a few charts that you might find helpful. But we were told the greatest challenges is limited resources. My role combines multiple functions as well as requires applying knowledge from multiple discipline areas, right? And if you're on the phone, you might feel stretched. You might feel like you have less to work with. So that's why we chose this next case study. It's really perfect for you. We take a look at a B2B database security provider that received a 40% budget cut and staff reduction. That is pretty darn significant. I think we can all agree. Talk about some limited resources. So David's going to dive a little more into this and tell us about what they did.
And as you can see, the company covering this case study is application security. And like I mentioned earlier, I get a chance to talk to tons of marketers. It's one of the best parts of the job. And I hear all the time about budget is an issue. And this particular case study, we were looking at a 40% budget cut for campaigns and staff. And so that's a pretty significant cut to have to deal with. And in fact, hang on just one second here. Our source for the story is Thomas Van Horn. He's a CMO of application security. And once he got word about this, he decided he had to kind of take stock of what's going on, take a look at past activities, and then make some choices about exactly what kind of marketing he wants to do in the future. Then take a look at all the different channels, how they were all working. And his exact quote is, I think it's real easy to get sucked into a mentality of, I have to do all these things. I have to do events, I have to do print, direct mail, social media, and the list goes on and on. And when the budget cut happens, maybe that list doesn't go on and on. You've got to take a look at it and maybe figure out exactly what's going to work best or not. So moving forward, the very first step is they went in and basically analyzed the whole strategy. First thing was taking a look at each channel and taking a look at the cost per lead. And in this case, they had some channels were costing $100 per lead or even more. Others were very cheap, $4 to $5 per lead. And the thing is, that didn't factor into the lead quality. You've got quantity coming in, you've got a cost per lead, but you've got to take that further analysis to actually figure out the dollar value of the sales opportunities that each channel is actually creating for you. So they went into the marketing automation system, to take a look at their data, and traced each opportunity in the system back to its initial lead source. That way they can map the touch points, all the way in the process. And looking at that, they took a look at each different channel and how the lead interacted before becoming an opportunity. And these channels include different things like events, brand awareness contact, like marketing content, organic web traffic coming in through search, PPC content that's coming in, and things like registrations on landing pages. And the problem was, basically the big problem, Van Horn summed it up here. When we checked into the dollar volume opportunities created, we found no correlation in the cost per lead of the program. In fact, some of these higher cost tactics resulted in the lowest contribution to the pipeline. That's a really significant problem right there. When high cost, low contribution. So the thing is, you want to look at the solution. And it's not pretty obvious. You have high cost, low value things. Don't do so many of them. And you want to, we find the things that don't cost as much, but they're actually working. Obviously, you want to expand those. And we're going to find out exactly what this company did in this program. So to dial back, what they found, they did a lot of major trade shows and large events. Those were generating the highest cost per lead. And so, and they also took the longest to become actual opportunities in that pipeline. And so the first thing was to do was reduce the major events. But the thing is, they didn't reduce all their events. They kind of took a strategic look at this thing, and they focused on more opportunities at smaller local events and maintained their presence at a few large industry trade shows, but kind of changed the overall objectives on how they handled those things. So the high-cost leads were at events. They just kind of changed the strategy, cut back a little bit, just kind of made took a bigger look at what they were doing at their events and kind of made that budget work for them. And the thing is expanding the low-cost activities. One, they changed their email program a little bit. They expanded the use of the messages and kind of made an informal program to send a quarterly update to a large list of prospects. And that way the emails were personalized. They weren't sales pitches. They were basically just insights, kind of brand awareness, kind of talking about some of the issues that the company dealt with. There's a little bit of entertainment involved in that. Just doing kind of fun stuff, not so much pushing a message to someone, just more kind of like, hey, we're out here. This is what we do, and just sort of providing some information. They also did email drip nurturing and just through the marketing automation program. And they also did, they also did some thought leadership with virtual events. So as opposed to hosting live events that are costly, they actually went with virtual events such as webinars. And another thing was actually negotiating new contracts. So they said, I lost my spot here. Daniel, can you jump in for just a second?
Yeah, so we're going to get into this definitely in the third part too when we talk about converting. I mean, it's so important to look at the cost per lead and to look at what leads are performing, what leads are really working for you, and how much they cost. And part of that, as we get into the end, is about sales. But I think what you can really see from this case study is they were hit with a major challenge, right? Getting a 40% cut is significant. And so what you have to do, not only when you get a 40% cut, but even if you get a 40% budget raise, is really focus on the tactics that are going to work for you. And what's involved in that is definitely a lot of measuring, a lot of testing. Sometimes it comes down to just negotiating with vendors, having a real honest conversation about what you're trying to do and how to do that most efficiently. And then finding out what should your cost per lead really be. David, do you want to talk about a little bit about what Thomas had to say about this, Thomas Van Horn, the CMO?
Well, actually, I want to go back on this last slide real quickly because I actually have an example here of how they actually renegotiated a contract. They set a cost limit for their Whitepaper hosting deal, and that particular cost per limit was way lower than their vendor's offer. And so when they went back to the vendor came back with other options, and that way they could actually meet the goal of the cost per lead. So they worked with the vendor, renegotiated, and they set a goal, and then and actually were able to meet it by working with the vendor and the vendor working with them. That was a successful outcome there. And so from there, not only are they changing some things, but they're also looking at new stuff. They looked at all their channels. They kind of figured out what's working, what's not, what's expensive in working, and what's inexpensive in working. But at the same time, they're not. They didn't quit innovating. They didn't quit reaching out and trying to do some different things. And so Van Horn said, I don't think you can base everything on past results. That we spend a fair amount of time trying new stuff and see what sticks. And in this particular case, they decided to do an online film series. It's a 6-episode mini-series based around database security and risk management, which is what that company did, through a fictional story. And they hosted the videos in a microsite, promoted those through email, promoted those through social media. I did some PR around that. And they also did some kind of brand awareness on those microsites, along with it. Once they got people in to watch the videos, they had some brand awareness activities just to kind of generate interest. And they also did a user-generated video contest. So they did 2 different kind of video-based things just to kind of try out new channels.
All right, thank you, David. I tweeted see, we got the results here. I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, and the final thing is, so all this, they took the big budget cut. They went in, analyzed everything they were doing, trying to figure out, kind of a cost-benefit analysis of each marketing channel, basically, and then went on to even continue to do new things. So the end result, as you can see here, there's 40% budget cuts, and the leads increased by 12%, even after that cut, and the opportunity value went up 65%. And along those, the same kind of lines, with the new stuff they were doing, they had 45% of the visitors to that microsite actually became qualified leads once they were involved in other marketing programs, so they were able to track them. They went to the microsite. 45% of those people who actually touched them some other way, that maybe went down and downloaded a white paper, maybe responded to a different email, they became qualified leads. And on the user-generated video, 12.5% of those videos became qualified leads when they were touching their marketing programs.
Excellent. Thank you, David. We have a question here from Francis. He says, what is a white paper hosting deal? So Francis, I can't speak specifically to what this marketer did, but in general, there are vendors out there that offer forms of content syndication where you can have your white paper go on different sites across the internet. You can have your white paper go show up next to different content, and you can pay for a cost per lead. So if you're finding difficulty with your content marketing and being able to you're generating some great content, but you are maybe fairly early in the process and you haven't been able to get it out to a new audience, or just in general you haven't been able to break through the strong audience you already have, content syndication is an option to get your white papers out of there. So an important thing to learn from this case study in talking about that white paper hosting deal is that they were looking for a limit on their cost per lead. So they went back to that vendor and they talked to that vendor, right? And they said, hey, this is what our cost per lead needs to be. And by telling the vendor what they were looking for, the vendor came back with several options that they hadn't heard before, and they were able to work with them and find ways to get the number of leads they needed at a cost that would meet the team's goals. And actually we have a direct quote here from the CMO in this case study, Mr. Van Horn. He said, they made opportunities available to me that I otherwise wouldn't have known about. So really, the lesson here, one, if you're looking for other ways to get your content out there, perhaps think about content syndication. But also, work with your vendor as a true partner. Tell your vendor what you're really trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. Don't just assume whatever you see either on the first sales call or the first demo or the first use of that product is all that product can do. A lot of products now and a lot of vendors have just such complex and intricate ways that you can use those products, and you have to really almost be an expert in that product to be able to know everything that you want to do. But if you work with your vendor as a partner, they might be able to open up new ways of using it that you weren't aware of before. So let's look now as we look at the top lead generation tactics where marketers are looking at what is most effective for them. So as we see towards the top there, this again is from the 2012 B2B Marketing Benchmark Report from MarketingSherpa. I tweeted a link to a free excerpt from this book through the hashtag Sherpa webinar. I also tweeted a link to the case study that David just talked about through hashtag Sherpa webinar if you want to read more about it. And I tweeted a link to our marketing analytics survey if you're interested in data, want to take that survey, and want to get a free website optimization special report. So looking at this, we can see that website optimization, SEO, and email, those are they're very effective for marketers. They've been the top 3 tactics year after year, not just in our most recent survey. When you look at those, that shows that content plays an increasingly important role. But you also have to find the right mix for your audience. We see webinars are pretty high up there too, and really that's the common denominator. Look for webinars, trade shows, content marketing, email marketing, SEO, website design, management, optimization. A lot of it comes down to content, comes down to generating content that's going to be helpful to your audience and help them make these complex buying decisions. That ties very nicely into what we're about to talk about next, which is how to nurture. But first, let's sum up capture by saying this. You really want to build a foundation with your personas. You want to know with a persona, we get deeper into this if people have questions, but your personas are basically the people you're trying to market to. DM made a statement here. I'm sorry, I don't have his full name. He just goes by DM. He said in response to the survey we had earlier, the poll we had earlier in this webinar, marketing to a lengthening sales cycle is a close second to my high-quality answer, right? Makes sense. If you want high-quality leads, well, you might be also marketing to a lengthening sales cycle. And if you are marketing to a lengthening sales cycle, a lot of these things go hand in hand. That's usually because more people are involved in it, right? The people that you were talking to in the past who had budget authority might no longer have budget authority, and they might just be influencers, and the budget authority might have raised in the organization. So when you look at personas, for example, if you're selling an IT solution, could have been a data center manager or some sort of IT level manager that had that budget authority, while now maybe it's someone higher that's a business leader and that IT manager, that IT director is only an influencer. Well, now you've got new personas that you have to make sure that you're speaking to as you're generating those leads. Yes, you want to get those influencers still that you might have done a good job before, the IT directors, but you also want to get those business level leaders who are now the decision makers in your funnel. Then to do that, you have to make sure you have a value proposition that speaks to each and every one of those. If you're not familiar with what a value proposition is, we can talk more about that in this webinar. But at a very high level is the answer to this question, the very succinct answer to the question, if I'm your ideal customer, why should I buy from you? And that value proposition is going to happen across many levels and across many different offers you have. So for example, the prospect level value proposition for the example I'm talking about here, if you have different personas now, the value proposition to the IT director is probably going to be very different than the value proposition to the business level leader, right? The value proposition to the IT director might focus a lot more on the technological aspects, of course, but the value proposition to the business level leader might talk about, either cost savings or new business opportunities or ROI. And then content. You need that content, as we just showed in the previous slide about how important content is in these top marketing tactics. You need the content to feed into SEO, to feed into webinars, to feed into, obviously, content marketing. And that's what it comes down to, is being able to give customers that content that's going to help them make that decision. And then you have to, as we saw in the cost per lead case study, you've got to find the right mix of lead generation tactics that work for you. That's likely going to be multi-channel. No one does anything in a vacuum. As you're watching this webinar today, you probably got invited through email, or you might have read one of our blog posts and you came here, or you might have seen one of our tweets, or you saw one of, again, ReadyTalk's emails, or you saw it on ReadyTalk's website. Again, you want to find all these channels, how they can work best together to engage your audience, generate their interest, and capture those leads. But, as we said, it doesn't end with capturing a lead. If you're interested in lead generation, you likely have some sort of a complex sale where it's a decision that customers have to either go back to their management to get approval, or they have to learn a lot more about. It's something we call a considered purchase. And when you have a considered purchase, the best thing to do is to continue to nurture those leads until they are sales ready and you can get them to convert. So as we look back at the 2012 B2B Marketing Benchmark Report, you want to generate quality leads. That's the biggest challenge. As this marketer says, it's pretty easy turning on a fire hose of leads for our sales team, but targeting and generating pre-qualified leads is a nut we haven't been able to crack. So one way to do that, again, is with nurturing. You're getting those leads in here, but then you're finding ways, smart ways, to target them with content that is appropriate for them, content to help move them to the next level in your funnel. And a great way to do that, we found, is through webinars. And so in this next case study, David's going to talk to us about a marketer that is using webinars for nurturing. David, do you want to tell us about SideQuest?
Absolutely, yeah. Like Daniel just said, the company here is SideQuest. And a big part of their lead gen and lead nurturing was using weekly webinars. And basically they had a pretty big problem with that, in that the webinars were successful, but from the marketing team, frequency had taken the place of relevance in the whole campaign. So basically they were just pumping out a weekly webinar, and that was the main concern, more so than making the webinars relevant, which is going to drive viewers, drive traffic, and drive interest. And so, as a matter of fact, the quote here from the source is from Laura Glover. She's the Director of Marketing Operations. Said, "We had one webinar a week, and it was all about SideQuest. What we did to market it was just send out a schedule of upcoming events." So, basically it was a marketing effort that was just kind of, it's not fair to maybe say boring, but it just kind of became routine. It just was the weekly webinar is just one of those things that happened. So the solution here was to come in and maybe look at the whole process. Maybe try to change that. Maybe do fewer webinars if that's going to work. Maybe try to find more relevance in the actual topics being covered in the webinars. And so the whole thing ended up being a 6-step process. Oops, let me go forward here. Sorry about that, everybody. And yeah, they went through 6 steps. And so the very first part was to just review the content of the webinars. Not even the frequency, but look at actually what they were doing. And like in the quote a second ago, the programs were all oriented toward the SideQuest products and services. It wasn't about providing information that maybe alleviated pain points of the people viewing it. It was just kind of almost kind of a push message, of the products and services they offered. So there was no education. There's no commentary from third parties. It was just SideQuest kind of saying, hey, here's what we do, here's our products, maybe buy from us. And so to alleviate that, it was creating new content. And one thing they did was a 3-part webinar series just in education. And that's they included third-party speakers. And so, to kind of break out of the content issue, it was just take a look at what they were doing and just make a radical change. You're going from the push message of here's what we are, to an actual education, which is, maybe helping out people. still learning about you, but at the same time they're actually getting something out of it as opposed to filling out messages going to them. Second part of that is they changed the schedule. So they looked at the content, made a change there, and then kind of looked at just the frequency of them. They had, okay, we're doing one webinar a week. We're just going to push it out there. So let's take a look at the actual schedule of this thing. And so the switch was they decided to do individual programs that were every other week as opposed to just a weekly thing. So they decreased the frequency of them, changed the starting time. Before they were doing it 2 p.m. Eastern Time. They changed it to 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and that was to attract prospects in Europe and also get the West Coast people early in the morning, but it wasn't so early they couldn't actually attend, and it was also not so late that the people and customers in Europe couldn't attend those. And they also cut webinars altogether through the months of July and August because their attendance was very low during then, so they just dropped it. The issue they had with this internally is it was a very tough sell for inside sales. They liked the webinars, they liked the prospects, they liked just the probably just the routine of it. They knew there was going to be a weekly webinar, they're going to get X number of things out of it. Even if their returns maybe weren't great, they were there. So that was an issue that they had to kind of deal with inside sales on making all these different changes. And next step was actually cleaning up the database, performing data hygiene. And so that's a big part of it. They had a system that everyone that came in was flagged according to industry. But the problem was there was a great deal of inconsistency in the way the individual jobs their job descriptions were recorded. So people were entering things in, they're just putting it all over the place. There's probably some examples of you go VP, you go Vice President. There's a bunch of different ways different jobs could be described, and they were just all over the place inside the database. So what they did is they standardized the way they were identified, and in this case they did a dozen standard job descriptions. So anyone who came into the database as a new contact got one of these 12 descriptions, and those were CEO, President, Vice President, Chancellor, and that's for people from higher education that were coming in, Director, Manager, Administrator, or Researcher. So they standardized the actual job description. So now they're breaking things down by industry, but they're also being able to break things down by job description as opposed to having all these different ones where you really couldn't make an accurate search to find, like, say, a vice president. Now you're going to find every vice president in the database where you didn't before. The issue with that is, and this is something that not everyone might be willing to do, they actually did it the hard way. They went into this thing manually and hired a summer intern to go in, examine every contact, and then assign them to one of the 12 categories. So it was a kind of a by-hand process. It's not fun. A lot of data hygiene is not fun. But at the end of the day, you end up with a really clean, great database. It's much more useful than something that's all over the place. The fourth step is they changed their email marketing plan. And they changed it in several different ways. For new contacts, they had invitations for these webinars that were sent out. The previous ones were just blasts that just didn't really provide information about the value of the events. These new invitations had several components. They provided the title of the webinar, obviously the date and time, so if someone's invited, they actually know how to get there and listen to it. They described the expert speaker because they had third-party sources now. If you recall, they changed their content a little bit and actually brought in some third-party experts. And then use some bullet points just to talk about the benefits, kind of provide that incentive on kind of showing the value prop of actually attending the webinar and taking in this new information. And also added calls to action within these emails. They put one at the top and at the bottom of the message and had hot links to the registration page. So the email went from just a blast that said, hey, here's what's going on, here's our schedule, here's our time, it's the same time every week, same bat time, same bat channel kind of thing, to something that's a little more targeted for each individual webinar. They gave a little value to the person receiving the email, said here's why you should attend, kind of pump the webinar up to actually talking about the expert speaker they're going to have and why you might want to hear from them, and made the calls to action very clear. So it's the email went from just a blast to something that actually has some value for the person getting it, and hopefully it'll make them more interested in each individual webinar. And from there, they talking about the data hygiene. Now that they have a clean database, they actually segmented their list. And so these emails were going out in different ways. And so at one point in time, they had everybody got the email within key target industries. But the problem was they were only sending it to very high-level prospects. And so the previous segmentation was just looking at the highest level thing. And the source said, we were segmenting so discreetly we were missing some people. So the change was they had the advanced webinar series. They segmented by industry, and they included existing customers as a way to upsell for additional services and software modules. Before, they're only selling to good prospects. Now they're actually sending these things to people who are existing customers because maybe they're going to be talking about something that the company does that they can actually upsell, something they can add on to an existing customer. And they also kind of changed the way the emails were structured. As opposed to this blast that says, okay, come to our webinar. They now did a series. They had one invitation would go out 1 week before the webinar. They'd also send a reminder email 2 days before the webinar. And that way it just kind of gave one more little push to try to get people to attend these things. So as opposed to just kind of blasting things out with the email program, they made a few changes. They segmented a little bit differently. They target a little bit differently. They're adding existing customers to the mix of people they're inviting to these webinars. And they're also making the email itself just a little more enticing, as opposed to, here it is. Now there's a little more information. There's a little more value. There's a little more incentive to actually maybe tune in to listen to the webinar. And then from there, they actually did follow-up. Before they weren't doing this, they had a two-stage strategy for follow-up. The first one, they did an email within 24 hours after the event. They provided a copy of the presentation, kind of like you'll get an email from this presentation that will have a copy of you get the slide deck and also the recording. You also get they had a list of the questions that were asked in the session with the answers that the company or expert speaker came up with. And they also had contact information for the presenters. So if you had any questions that you didn't get answered, you had a chance to go in and talk to go in and ask the question privately. And maybe you had a question that was too thorough. Maybe it just came to you later on. You had a way to actually get in contact with the people you heard from the webinar and get their answer directly. And after the second part of that, they actually made a phone call. The inside sales team used the attendees, and they made follow-up phone calls, and those were happening several days after the event. So inside sales went from being kind of skeptical about the whole thing. Now they're actually given a list of phone numbers. They can make follow-up calls and kind of take the lead in their hands at that point. And then the last part is they just focused on metrics to improve performance. They actually started looking at things. They started measuring and tracking a handful of KPIs, and these included the email open rates for the new email sends, the hard bounces of those emails, the click-through rates in those emails, the registrations they actually got on the campaigns, on the webinars, and then they broke it down by cost, with the cost per attendee and also the cost per lead. So now they're generating new leads, and so they're taking those leads and actually tracking them and being able to apply a cost to each lead. And before, with the old webinar series, they only had one metric they were really looking at, and that was just the number of leads, the number of attendees at the webinar. Anyone who attended was considered a lead. There was no qualification. They just were brought in, dumped, and that was probably what inside sales was enjoying, was the fact that they got, however many attendees there were, boom, we got all these leads. But the new process actually created more qualified leads, for one thing, and it just kind of changed the process a little bit. They reduced the frequency. They brought in some new people. And so going toward the results, and obviously we talked about the segmentation capabilities are improved, and that just comes from, a different segmentation philosophy maybe or strategy, but it really came from the data hygiene. It came from you got a messy database. You go in and clean it up, it's going to make your segmentation a whole lot better, as it did in this case. And because of this, you can, the segmentation was able to really target who they sent it to, even adding to who they send these things to, using the existing customers. And the big result, when you look down at the bottom here, 300% increase in acceptance rate. And so they reduced the number of webinars, but they changed the whole strategy, made a little more, I would say, more thought-out process in the whole thing, and so you end up with a great result. And Daniel?
All right, thank you, David. So I just wanted to show this kind of micro case study as well. We didn't really have time for a full third case study, but you can read this entire case study if you'd like. I'm tweeting it right now through #SherpaWebinar. There's a link to this case study. There's a link to the case study David just talked about. What David talked about was a great example of using segmentation based on firmographic information you have. For example, titles. Something's going to be appropriate for a vice president. Something's going to be appropriate for a more junior level person in the organization. But in this case study, and you can read more about it, what was really interesting is they use more behavioral-based metrics, right? So they use their CRM system to find out about past webinar attendance, past white paper downloads, specific article clicks from past newsletters. And then they did something similar to what you saw in the previous case study, not necessarily blasting every webinar to every person, but finding what is appropriate and what is relevant to that person, because it really all comes down to relevance when you're nurturing. So if I'm in a very early stage of the funnel and I'm very low in the organization, if you're telling me about some special promotion you have to close and to sign right now before the quarter's over, I'm probably going to be turned off by that. However, if I'm very far along in the funnel, you might not have to make the case anymore with any content about why I should be interested in your type of solution or your company. I'm probably more interested in some specific information about implementation, let's say. So this is where segmentation and targeting is so important for nurturing, and it's so important for webinars, finding the people that the webinar content is going to be most appropriate for, and perhaps doing a lower volume of webinars to everyone that you're reaching, and more specific targeted webinars to the different personas you're reaching and to the different stages in your funnel that you're trying to nurture. Another great thing about CRMs and automation that we don't have in here is so if you have that webinar to those you're nurturing, it's a great way to get hand raisers, right? It's a great way with a survey at the end or whatever other things you do to get people to raise their hand and say, hey, what we want is more information about your company. We want to dive deeper in your company. I want a salesman to call me. I want whatever. It's great to just take that information, put it right in the CRM, or use an automation tool to reach out to them with an email, use a CRM to get it right to the salesperson to make sure that you're following up on that hot lead, which really is a lead. It is a hand raiser. It is someone who, because of your content, they are saying, hey, I want more information. Tell me more about it. So I've got a few questions here I want to address. First of all, Francis asks, invitations to a webinar for a business that is just starting with very few email addresses, is it appropriate to obtain the prospect's email from their website? So Francis, I'm assuming that you're talking about simply maybe going to websites, seeing people's email addresses, and then or scraping those email addresses in some way and sending them webinar invites. I do not think that is appropriate. I want to first say and make clear, but I'm not a lawyer, so do not take this as any specific legal advice. But according to the canned spam regulations, I do not believe you can send unsolicited email. Not only might not be against canned spam regulations, it's really, in a permission-based marketing age, it's really a great way to alienate people. So if you do not have a very big email list at this point, a few things you can do. I mean, one, just put out great content and try to push to have that grow virally and push to refer people to it. Also use the replays of the webinars to get people to see what value there is in the webinars to attend, but then also find partnerships. So find those influencers in your industry and see if they'll come and speak on your webinars, maybe bring their own audiences. See if they'll promote it on their websites or their blogs or to their lists. Engage in those partnerships, which might be, when you're starting out early, frankly, it might be a paid thing where you're paying to be included in their newsletter or paying to get them to speak and bring their audience. But then over time, as you get your own audience, it could become a trade-off. So that's what I would advise to you, Francis. Definitely look into some of those canned spam regulations.
I was going to say, and Daniel, let me jump in really quickly. And another thing to think about, yes, on the canned spam, and not only is it just not a good practice to grab these addresses. You're not really opting them in. You're really just kind of sending it to someone who may not even want to receive it. You'd rather have them want to receive your email as opposed to saying, how come this is in my inbox? But another consideration is the fact that if you're an international company, if you're selling your product, services, whatever internationally, the rules and regulations in Europe are way different than they are even here. Much more stringent. There's a double opt-in. And if you're sending email to a European prospect, that you're just grabbing their email address and sending it to them, there could be even more consequences. So it's something to keep in mind there.
Yeah, and we have another question here. And Simone, if you want to pipe in too, if you have any opinion on this, from the hashtag Sherpa webinar on Twitter at CMO4Hire says, any suggestions on length of B2B marketing webinars? So my advice would be this, again, it comes down to the personas and it comes down to what you're trying to accomplish and who you're trying to talk to. So if you're talking very high in an organization, it's very difficult to get those people's time, and making as short of a webinar as possible is going to probably be the most effective thing. If you're speaking lower in an organization, especially to something more technical, and especially if you have lots of good content that you feel you can share with them, you might try more of an hour webinar. But the other great thing too is to just test different lengths and see what works for you and see what works for your audience. And ask your audience, once you start producing webinars, what they're interested in, what kind of length, what kind of quality. I will caution you. So on the Marketing Experiments web clinics that we do, they're an hour, and we always get feedback that they're too short. But that's the kind of feedback you're looking for also. So we don't want to make them so long to the point where people are like, okay, it's too long, it's enough. If you're familiar with the show Seinfeld, his advice was, always leave on a high note, leave them wanting more. So I would say make the webinar just short of what you think your audience wants. Simone, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, exactly what you said is kind of what we do as best practices here at ReadyTalk, and it does really depend on the type of person you're trying to target, whether it's an IT buyer versus a marketer even. I think there's a difference in attention span even. Some people are far more direct and to the point and want that information quickly, and some of them would rather have more of an in-depth, give me exactly what I'm looking for, explain the details. So I think it's a matter of kind of testing with your audience, seeing what works best for them, putting that in your post-event surveys, maybe doing a webinar about best practices for a webinar, timing, putting that in polling questions. And actually, I had a speaker on our series one time who did a really cool example that I haven't tried yet, but I think it's a good idea, so maybe you can put it into practice, is scheduling the webinar for 30 minutes instead of maybe the typical hour-long webinar, but giving you practices and tactics to go immediately and put to use in that 30 minutes that he saved you at the end. So something that was like immediate action items that person could go back and be like, okay, I just took away 5 great points that I can put into my webinar plan or whatever it might be, and put those into action with some of that remaining time that he gave us. So that was kind of a fun idea.
I like that idea, Simone. Once you get that time in people's calendars, make sure you're using it effectively. So we've got a little more feedback, too, about the can spam comments I just made. Catherine said, the exception to can spam is market research emails, although B2B relationships should be careful on this. And Don says that's not true. It's totally legal to send an unsolicited email B2B if it is relevant to their business. That's true, Don. For can spam, the regulations are a lot looser for businesses. Francis's question was, he didn't specify if he was B2B or B2C, so try to keep as wide of a range of away from breaking any laws as possible. So keep in mind, for B2C, you can definitely get in some serious trouble. For B2B, there are looser laws there, but again, once you, the can spam violations are pretty expensive, so you want to avoid that. But in general, once you break someone's trust, it's very, very hard to win it back, so keep that in mind as well. Let's jump ahead now. Just wanted to show some of the effectiveness that people have told us through the B2B Marketing Benchmark Report, about lead nurturing and lead scoring. These are very effective tactics. 35% is the average lifts organizations get with lead nurturing, 77% for lead scoring. If you combine those two, it's 163%. We didn't speak very specifically about lead scoring today. We didn't have time to. But if you see some of the previous tactics we looked at, especially using your CRM and your automation platforms to find out the most relevant people to send emails to, that could tie very nicely into lead scoring. And again, it comes down to sending the most relevant email, sending the most relevant information to people through your nurturing. So let's, Simone, if you wouldn't mind launching one more survey for us here as we close out this nurturing section. We want to know what tactics you're going to be investing in for 2013. Which of these marketing tactics are you most likely to invest your budget in the coming year? So social media has been perennially popular. Website upgrades. The website is really the hub for almost any tactic you do. It likely leads back to a website where you're trying to get conversion. Content, as we talked about, is so critical to nurturing. Search, both SEO and PPC, have been very effective. Landing page optimization ties very much into those website upgrades. Online advertising. As we talked about, Francis, some people who don't have as big of an audience already might look at advertising as a way to buy some traffic. Of course, email and direct mail, more traditional types like print advertising and telemarketing. So let's close this out and look at the results. And it looks like it's pretty mixed. It's pretty interesting. Content is in the lead there, which makes sense because, again, like we said, content ties into so many different things. Content is so important to nurturing, but it is pretty mixed. I have to say, sadly, print advertising, no one is looking to grow in that area. So let's see how this compares to what marketers told us through the B2B Marketing Benchmark Report. Social media was the biggest thing where budgets would increase, which is not overly surprising because social media is still a very, very growing medium. But along with that, content creation is right there, number 3. That they're all very close. And again, if you're investing in social media, content marketing and content creation is something that really just goes hand in hand with that tactic. And as we look at, much like the audience told us today, print advertising, unfortunately, 30% are going to decrease their budget in print advertising, although 12% are looking to increase. And anytime we look at these charts, something that always sticks in my mind, something I learned at a B2B summit a few years ago, one of the speakers went up there, and I think he was doing print advertising, and he said, hey, the reason I'm doing print advertising is because I read a MarketingSherpa B2B Marketing Benchmark Report. I saw others are not doing print advertising. Others are not investing in it. So I see there's less competition there. It's going to be easier for me to get some prospects to respond. And I kind of like that approach. Zig where others zag. Try out some things that you see are less popular because you're going to have less competition. If everyone's doing social media, it's going to be a lot harder to get Twitter followers. It's going to be a lot harder to get people to watch your YouTube, read your blog, whatever it might be. But if there's less competition in print advertising, you might be able to stick out with an ad that has a very strong value proposition. So running out of time here, but to sum it up, when you're nurturing, you're really just providing your audience with the information they want, and it's when they want it, when they need it, to help push them through and make that decision. And that happens with consistent communications that builds that relationship, builds that engagement, and gives them what they need to help get them to the next step in your funnel. David, do you have any more thoughts on nurturing?
Yeah, and this kind of speaking to the poll results, this is where content marketing is huge. With lead generation, you have one type of content marketing. That's kind of your brand awareness, your thought leadership. You want to third-party stuff. You want people to just be provided something they're going to kind of learn about you, just see your name associated with something. They're just kind of become aware of you. Once you get to the nurturing stage, it changes a little bit. And here's where you provide the relevant content like we were talking about. And you can do this in different ways. If you really have your buying stages broken down, you can map your content to the buying stages. And in doing that, you're answering the questions that your prospects want to have answered at different stages. It may be about a business pain point that's related to your field. It may be an actual question about your exact offerings and maybe how your exact offerings are different from your competition's. But the main thing is you're giving them content that's kind of meeting their pain points. You're answering their questions, and that's where the relevance comes in. And keep in mind, content, it's many different formats. You've got, obviously, your white papers. You've got your blog posts, and so it's kind of the printed, so to speak, form of content. You have a video. It's huge for B2B right now. You have webinars. And in webinars, you can have multiple content from that. One, you've got the webinar itself as a content piece. After the webinar is over with, you may have a transcript of the webinar. You may have a slideshow of the slide deck. You might have a complete replay of the webinar, so it can be used over and over again in multiple different ways. And so, the main thing with nurturing is you want to think kind of instructional with your content. That comes down to mapping to the buying stages. And Daniel?
And I think Daniel is actually just dialing back in. His phone died, so he'll be here in just a second.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, my phone just died. I heard this loud noise, and all was gone. But looks like now we're going to talk about converting our final step in the funnel. But before we do, I wanted to mention our our 2012 Lead Generation Benchmark Report. I'm going to tweet a free excerpt through the hashtag. But we also have a promo code here, and I believe ReadyTalk's going to be sending a follow-up, and you can get $100 off that Lead Generation Benchmark Report. It has the same type of information you see here about the B2B Marketing Benchmark Report, the type of information that can help you and your business leaders make decisions, and if you're an agency, can help your clients make decisions as well. But now as we look into converting, it all comes back to attributing to revenue. It all comes back to getting that final deal in the end. That is why we generate leads. That can be the toughest thing to achieve in trying to demonstrate alignment and trying to prove your worth to sales. And as we look at from the B2B Marketing Benchmark Report, what marketers have told us, that the greatest priority they have is they're trying to generate leads. But that biggest challenge is converting, is getting that final sale. And that's not simply a sales job. You can't just say, hey, I gave sales a lead and now they have to convert on it. You have to be an active part in that because you have to give them high-quality leads. You have to give them, I hate to use that term, but really sales-ready leads. I mean, that's the best way to spend sales time. So, David, why don't you walk us through just a quick high-level 4-step process on how you can analyze those leads with sales and work towards leads that convert.
Okay, right. And this is kind of where the whole data thing we started off with comes into play. You have to be able to get the data, and that's through your marketing automation and CRM solutions. But you have it, you want to analyze it and do something with it. So the first thing is review the closed deals. You want basically an overhead view of your entire pipeline. That takes, you got your lead gen, the lead enters the pipeline, all the way through to that closed deal. Kind of find out the channels, how they got into your system. And if you want to look at a handful of KPIs here. You want to do the number of deals won, the total revenue of those deals from the different leads, average deal size, and kind of look at your buyer persona traits. Once you get in, you're segmenting people. Hopefully, as they're going through your pipeline, you're scoring them, they're interacting with you, and you're able to maybe segment them even further because you're learning more about them all the way down the pipe. And then next, you want to think about, first you're looking at the closed deals. Now just review all your new leads, kind of going back to that first case study where that's one thing they did is kind of analyze how things came in, how the different cost per lead of different channels, that type of a thing. And so that's why you have KPIs here. You want to look at your actual lead volume, exactly how many leads are you bringing in, maybe through different channels. How many of those leads are qualified? You maybe bring in a whole bunch of leads, maybe some of them are qualified, some of them are not. And I think we can all agree that everyone likes qualified leads better than just a general lead that comes in you don't know anything about. And you also want to be able to track the actual cost per lead through the channels. How it's kind of like that first case study. You may have a channel that's cost a whole lot per lead, but at the same time maybe they're not really producing a whole lot at the end of the pipe. And so you want to know what the cost per lead is in the intake. And here is where we get into sales and marketing alignment. I know that's a big issue. It's better at some companies than others, but this is a place where you want to talk to your salespeople. You can have informal discussions about this. You can actually set up formal meetings. Both work. As a matter of fact, maybe do both at the same time. You have some informal discussions, but also actually have formal meetings with sales to go in and kind of see what they think. Kind of talk about different channels and different quality of leads and what they feel about what you're doing, the handover, what you're handing them and how they can actually handle those. And keep in mind that if they're telling you that you're giving them leads that aren't qualified, get them back in your lead nurturing system. Just say that, okay, they're not sales qualified, but they are marketing qualified. We just need to work with them a little bit more, and that's where the lead nurturing comes back into play. And then the fourth thing is you just want to identify your opportunities. And this is kind of where you get to that holy grail, and this is where your analytics and data really come into play, because if you have really strong data, you have really strong metrics, you can analyze that, really crunch into there, and maybe you can get into predictive analytics. And that would be something where you could, say maybe build a model based on previous customer behavior to try to find out maybe what your ideal customer is. Kind of, these are my good customers, here's what they do, here's what we know about them, here's the way they interact with us, and maybe actually go out and find new customers that meet that. If you find out somebody, let's say they attend a webinar and go through the whole thing, maybe someone who attends a webinar and then actually clicks through the email and downloads the follow-up, the recording or what have you, maybe they were automatically a sales qualified lead. Those people are extremely valuable to you. You've learned that. So now when you go in and you have a new person who's come into your system, they're a generated lead, they attend your webinar and they do all these follow-up activities, now you can score them and now you know. So, being able to identify the new opportunities, be able to identify who's going to be your best customers in the future, and it's predictive analytics is going to come from having good data, keeping track of all these things. So it's hard to overemphasize, but if you can follow these things, you can actually see that overhead view of your entire pipeline. If you can actually track the lead as a person, they come into your system, they're a lead, but it's also a person. And that person goes through your whole marketing program, your lead nurturing program. In a complex sale, that might be 6 months, it might be a year, it might be 18 months, depending on what your service or product might be. If you can see what they do all the way through that process, be able to track them, have that data on hand, you can turn those numbers into something that's actually usable to predict your future behavior of new leads.
Thanks, David. Unfortunately, we're all out of time. It's 3:01, but there are 2 more slides that I wanted to make sure showed up on the replay so you can pause and take a look. Here are some metrics that you can consider as you are trying to do this analysis, everything from total lead volume to ROI. And also we have a little handy spreadsheet here that has all those metrics, and so you can make a spreadsheet of your own and start tracking and seeing what's working for you. Again, it comes down when you're converting, you got to enable sales. You got to give them the information they need, and you've got to deliver nurturing materials to push your prospects through to that conversion point. Do not think it is only sales' job to convert. You've got to work with them on that. And if you do, it will not only help your performance, it will help your standing in the organization. A lot of organizations I've seen where sales wasn't involved in what marketing was doing, and there were a lot of political battles there. So again, I hope we've showed you that lead generation is more than getting an email address. It comes down to, yes, capturing, getting that information you need and continuing to optimize that process, but also nurturing, pushing those people through the funnel, pulling them through the funnel by giving them the information they need, the information they want to help make that complex decision, and then in the end working with sales to convert them and continually optimizing that process. Again, I am Daniel Burstein, the Director of Editorial Content for MECLabs. David Kirkpatrick, Senior Reporter of MECLabs, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
And Simone, and for everyone at ReadyTalk, thanks for having us.
You bet. We thank you guys for joining us. Again, thanks for everybody sticking around for a little bit longer too. I'm going to close out the meeting. However, we'd love to get your feedback on today's presentation. So if you take a minute to fill out the post-event survey, that'd be awesome. Also, just a reminder, you guys are getting a recording later on today with the link to the recording, a copy of the slide deck so you can take a little bit more in-depth look at that. And there will be a discount code in there for the handbook that we covered today. So definitely take advantage of those 3 things. So thanks, guys. Everybody, have a great day. We hope you join us again in another event on our webinar series. Bye.